time of writing, RuPaul's Drag Race has recently finished up its 14th season. Recently started its 7th season of All Stars. Recently announced the cast for season 3 of Canada's Drag Race. Okay, literally in the 6 months or so that it's taken for me to make this video, there have been 7 seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race. And that's not even all the ones that are coming out this year. For my own sanity, I cannot keep redoing these numbers, so we're going with as of June 2022, there were 180 total American RuPaul's Drag Race contestants and 153 other international contestants from the RuPaul Cinematic Universe. Out of the entire number, there have been 2 queens assigned female at birth. Gottmik, a trans man in US Season 13, and Victoria Scone, a cis lesbian in UK Season 3. In the entire 13 years of RuPaul's Drag Race runtime, with 333 contestants, 28 total seasons, and new seasons coming out literally every 6 weeks, there have been 0 drag kings. What are drag kings? And why does it matter? Hi, I'm Jack Loeb, and I'm a drag king. I've been performing drag for nearly 3 years now, and I love it. Drag is more in the mainstream than ever before, mainly thanks to RuPaul's Drag Race. Drag queens can headline pride events attended by thousands, get invited to fashion weeks and the Met Gala, amass millions of social media followers, especially if they're white, and for the first time ever create internationally successful careers out of their art. However, all of that only applies to drag queens. Drag kings are the masculine equivalent of queens. People, usually lesbians, trans men, or other queer people assigned female at birth, who create masculine personas to perform on stage. Drag kings and male impersonators have been around as long as drag queens have, but have never received even a fraction of the same acclaim. I want to examine why that is. But before we dive in, an introduction and note on intent. Interjection. I'm filming this 5 months after what you just saw, and most of that 5 months has been spent trying to figure out how to say this bit correctly. Talking about gender and sexuality is difficult, and it's something that I'm learning about all the time. A not insignificant part of that learning has come from Why No Kings, a heretofore anonymous Instagram meme account that I've had the privilege of running over the last few months. The kings I've met and discussions I've had on Why No Kings are extremely dear to me, and I want to thank everyone who's followed or interacted with the account. If you haven't seen the account, check it out! There are some amazing kings and drag artists that you can follow, as well as some memes that you can laugh at and learn from. I believe, as Adrienne Marie Brown puts it, that we are moving towards a non-binary future. Drag is a part of that. And I also believe that we are moving towards a non-binary drag future. It's weird to talk about drag kings and queens in this binary sense, as though the drag world is split into suits and dresses. A large and growing part of the drag population calls themselves drag things, or drag monsters, or drag queens, which is a mixture of queen and king, embracing the non-binariness of their work. Personally, I call myself a drag king because I like how it connects my drag to a lineage of queer histories that resonates and feels familiar. Out of drag, I don't identify as cis, but I'm also not the transest person you've ever met. When I meet other kings or drag artists, some of them identify pretty similarly to me, and others are completely different. A lot of what we experience as queer and trans people exists on the cresting wave of language and understanding. Preferences on terminology varies wildly from person to person, and a word that's used today to describe something might have dropped from the lexicon in 6 months' time. This is all good. Gender, sexuality, and expression are shifting, nebulous concepts, and language will shift with them. I say all this to preface and apologise for the imperfect language I use to describe my thoughts and experiences in this video. I am a very basic person by whom to examine the dynamics of kings and queens. I'm white, thin, able-bodied, not definitively trans, but I really hope that this video can invite more people who are more diverse to come and share their thoughts and experiences on their drag and the drag community. But specifically, I want to give you a heads up that you're going to hear terms like assigned female at birth, or AFAB, and assigned male at birth, or AMAB. These are imperfect and controversial terms, because some people feel like they lump trans people in with their gender assigned at birth, rather than accepting the gender they actually are. Other people don't mind these terms. For me, while I don't identify as a woman, I was assigned female at birth and raised accordingly. Any queerness or transness I experience is shaped by that history. Genevieve Berrick has an essay on drag kings that puts it like this. As a human being, I am an implicitly gendered subject, with or without my permission. This is a fact which follows from the regulatory fiction that governs our world. Hence, I am, as in fact we all are, always invested in the relative success or failure of performances of masculinities and femininities. A lot of times, delineating people by their assigned gender at birth is pretty meaningless. The two queens from the beginning of this video, Gottmik and Victoria Scone, are drastically different people, both in and out of drag. It seems silly to categorize them together when their assigned gender at birth is kind of the only thing that connects them. Yet, in cases like this, as well as the vast majority of real-life gay and drag bars, AFAB performers are so scarce that when they do appear, we need to talk about it. And we need to talk about why they're so scarce in the first place. Currently, drag revolves around queens, and I want to draw attention to the parts of drag that are less well known and appreciated. In the context of this video, that mostly means drag kings who identify as assigned female at birth. That's my experience, and the experience I know how to talk about. However, I think a lot of the points in this video can apply to anyone who doesn't fully fit in with the femme queen crowd. Similarly, any criticisms that I have towards the larger drag community are not aimed at one specific group. I strongly believe that having a marginalised identity does not absolve you of the potential to cause harm to other marginalised identities. We're all learning, and we're all capable of messing up and hurting other people. At the moment, drag kings receive a lot of that hurt. I really want to help move our community forwards in a way that supports and benefits everybody. I guess all I'm saying is that this stuff is really complicated and can be difficult to talk about. I'm not going to pretend like I've got it all figured out, but I hope that this video can at least start to shed some light on things and serve as a jumping off point for more people to start thinking critically about drag. So, thank you for giving me grace, and on we go. Let's start off by looking at some basic stats. Currently, the primary way that drag artists make it off their hometown stage and into the public eye is through reality TV. I made a list of every TV show and online series I could find that featured real-life drag artists. I kept my parameters pretty broad, but focused on shows like RuPaul's Drag Race or The Great British Bake Off, where you get to know the contestant over time and see a range of their episodes, rather than individual one-offs. I found 10. First, we've got the RuPaul's Drag Race Cinematic Universe, with 28 seasons and 333 contestants. Then there's Dragula, an American horror-based TV show with 4 seasons and 41 contestants. La Más Draga is a Mexican YouTube series with 4 seasons and 44 contestants, and Camp Wanakiki is an American YouTube series with 3 seasons and 30 contestants. House of Drag, with 2 seasons and 21 contestants, is a New Zealand TV competition. Drag Heels, with 2 seasons and 18 contestants, is a Canadian TV show. We've also got Call Me Mother and Queen of the Universe, which are both TV spin-offs of Drag Race. Call Me Mother has 1 season and 10 contestants, and Queen of the Universe is a combo drag and singing competition with 1 season and 14 contestants. Finally, there's Drag Me King, an American YouTube series specifically featuring kings, which has 1 season and 6 contestants, and Alaska Thunderfuck's Drag Queen of the Year Pageant Competition Award Contest competition, which has 8 contestants, and which isn't actually a series at all, but a drag pageant that gets streamed online. This list covers 13 years, from 2009 when the first episode of RuPaul's Drag Race aired. There definitely were drag artists on TV before then, but it was more one-off scenarios than extended episodes. The total number of individual contestants in this collection is 525. Without Drag Race, it's 141, so RuPaul definitely claims a hefty chunk of that number. Now, here's where the fun starts. And as a heads up, I did have to do maths for this bit, and I did Google most of the maths, so I'm pretty sure it's right, but it might not be like 100% to the infinite decimal correct, because hi, I'm Jack, I'm 28 years old, and I never fucking learned how to count. Anyway, out of that total number, over 500 performers from all over the world, 24 were assigned female at birth. 14 of them are kings. 6 are queens, and the remaining 4 are monsters, things, and so on. 6 of that 24 were people of colour. This makes AFAB performers as a whole a mere 4.6% of our total media consumption of drag. Kings make up 2.6%. AFAB people of colour are 1.1%. And I cannot emphasise enough, these numbers are from me scraping the barrel of drag content. Drag Me King is an awesome YouTube series to the point that it wildly skews the data, both in favour of kings and people of colour. Drag Me Heels also specifically focuses on showcasing the breadth of drag performers, and the Drag Queen of the Year pageant is just that, a pageant. One king, Chicago legend Tenderoni, whom we stan, actually shows up twice in Drag Me King and the Drag Queen of the Year pageant. So let's say we cut those 3 competitions out of the running and focus it down on 7 competitions that the average drag fan is slightly more likely to have heard of. Now we're at 493 performers, 333 of which are from Drag Race. 13 of those performers are assigned female at birth. 5 of them are kings. 2 of them are people of colour. That puts the mainstream drag representation of AFAB people at a cool 2.6%. Kings are 1%. People of colour, 0.4%. Also, these numbers only exist from 2018 onwards. That was the first year that any drag show, House of Drag and Camp Monokiki, featured a king at all. Up until that point, there had been 128 AMAB performers. And obviously I'm glad that there are shows other than RuPaul's Drag Race out there, but how many of y'all have actually watched House of Drag and seen Hugo Girl and Willie Smack and Tush perform? What about Call Me Mother with Toddy and Hercules? I haven't, and I'm the one making this fucking essay. Also, as an aside, out of those 13 performers we've had since then, 9 of them, 70%, have made it to the finale of their competition or won it outright. So, why is there such a huge disparity in drag representation? More than 7% of the US population identifies as bisexual or queer, and there's roughly the same amount of lesbians as there are gay men. There should be as much opportunity for AFAB people to get into drag as AMAB people. And yet, every depiction of drag in media, as well as the vast majority of real-life gay and drag bars, says otherwise. What is it about drag kings that keeps them in the shadows? If you hang out with drag queens, or cis gay men who are fans of drag, you often hear lines like, "Kings have bad makeup. They don't dress well. They just aren't as entertaining as drag queens."
Work me down, work me down.
You know, I don't normally like drag kings, but you're actually pretty good. It's tempting to say that all these attitudes are outright bullshit, and that kings are absolutely equivalent to queens in every way, and anything that says otherwise is bigotry. And I'm not saying that bigotry isn't involved here, because it is, and we'll get to that later. But it'd be ridiculous to say that there isn't a difference in how kings and queens do drag. There is. Make a lineup of any random kings and queens, and you can see differences in what they're doing and how they're doing it. But, surprise, it's a much deeper than just wearing a suit or drawing on an eyeliner beard. The longer I do drag as a king, the more I'm convinced that it is wildly unfair and close-minded to hold kings and queens to the same expectations. Primarily because, in our current drag world, those expectations are set by queens. Who kings are and what kings are doing with gender and performance often comes from a completely different angle than how queens are doing it. To compare kings directly to queens, who, as a group, are currently enjoying unprecedented fame and fortune, creates a wildly uneven playing field that sets kings at a disadvantage before they even start. Keeping a queen-centric view of drag eradicates the history, identity, and experiences of an enormous proportion of the LGBTQ population. It excludes lesbians, trans men, queer women of all stripes, and an enormous proportion of non-binary people from spaces they're supposed to feel welcome and celebrated in, as well as denying them huge amounts of money and social influence. If given the tools and resources that queens currently enjoy, drag kings wouldn't need to be held analogous to queens because they can and will do so much more with their art. Ignoring drag kings and other AFAB performers completely limits the scope of what drag can be, what art can be, and what queer liberation looks like. And yet, show after show, year after year, the drag powers that be insist on excluding us and upholding rigid gender binaries, even when the art form itself purports to turn them on their head. So let's have a look at why that is. I'm going to break down what mainstream drag is and how it works. I'm going to analyse what king drag is, what's involved in it, what it means to present it to the world, and how people perceive it. But to start with, let's start with what we know and go from there. Drag queens. Currently, drag consists overwhelmingly of feminine presenting queens, most of whom are performed by people assigned male at birth. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that most men drawn to drag are typically lean femme of centre even before they start performing. Femininity in men is typically seen as undesirable and is frequently punishable. Drag allows men to escape these societal strictures and to explore and be rewarded for presenting as female and engaging in feminine expression. Queen drag revolves roughly around the nebulous notion of female impersonation. using clothing, makeup, wigs, padding, and mannerisms to present a female persona. Drag history and transgender history are deeply interconnected. Drag's female impersonation can be closely tied to the trans idea of passing, which is when a trans person looks so like their chosen gender that a cis person cannot tell that they're trans. The crucial difference, of course, is that trans women aren't impersonating women per se, whereas the majority of femme drag amplifies impersonation beyond the point of passing. Drag queens aren't just regular trans women living their day-to-day lives, they're stage performers and entertainers. Just like burlesque dancers, showgirls, magicians, circus performers, drag queens have to wow their audiences to make a living. This is why most drag queens don't pass as women. They're not trying to. Dragging up something is to push it to its visual and conceptual extremes, hence phrases like fashion, but make it drag. Like the Halberstam quote at the beginning of this section states, queer men and femmes have long been the refractors of femininity. They twist and refashion it within their own world, and then cishet society sucks it back up. I mean, 10 years ago the average woman had never even heard of contouring, but now, partly thanks to drag, it's practically compulsory. I also want to note that there is a huge proportion of queer femininity that originates with black women and black queer femmes. So much so that when white queer men translate femininity into their drag, it is often already overlaid with black queer femininity. That's how you get the slang, speech patterns, dance styles, gestures, and so on that often originate with black queer culture, but have gotten smushed into a generic gay culture. So if we're going to look at the world of drag, which takes our ideas of gender and, at the very least, flips them around, we should know what we're starting with. Over the centuries, heteropatriarchal society has created monumental structures of binary gender, especially femininity, where everything a woman does can reinforce and negate her ability to fit into society's idea of woman. And I do mean everything. The clothes you wear, how they're cut and how they fit, what colours and fabrics they are, your shoes, the heel height, how comfy they are, how many you have, your hair length, cut, how you wash your hair, makeup, do you wear it, how often, how much, what kinds, your voice, how loud you speak, the intonation and speech patterns, how you sit, stand, walk, your hand gestures, how your body looks, how is your hormonally regulated fat distributed, do you shave your legs, like your eyebrows, wax your mustache, do you wash your face, what with, what kind of food do you eat, do you diet, which diet, do you exercise, what kind of exercise, your character and personality, do you like animals, do you like sex, what kind of sex, how is your house decorated. This isn't new. I know we all know this, we're not doing advanced gender theory here. And these are all pithy archetypes, of course, but conventional gender and drag arguably revolves around archetypes. I kind of like to think of traditional gender roles as sewers underneath society, filled with the stinking detritus that we have no real use for, but still wafting up to ruin our lives with its stench through blocked toilets, manholes, and the occasional burst pipe. And if that's the case, then drag artists are the sanitation workers, honey! Anyway, a lot of things in that above list were obviously visual: hair, makeup, clothing, and so on. Traditionally, women are visual objects. A huge part of their worth as humans comes from how attractive straight men find them. Femininity is passive, masculinity is active. You be a man, you look like a lady. Think of any formal event ever. Proms, weddings, red carpets. Women are glittering and colourful, with hair done, features painted, bodies on display, everything done in service of the visual to draw the eye. The envy of the ball, the diamond, is the most beautiful woman, who is consequently the most woman. Conversely, men at these events are, without exception, monochromatic and absolutely fucking identical. It literally makes fashion headlines when a man wears like a coloured tux on the red carpet. Because ultimately it doesn't matter what men look like. Their gender is not equated to their visual appearance beyond a few basic secondary sex characteristics, muscle development, facial hair, and so on. Gender validation comes from a man's actions and abilities, and of course, by having the most beautiful object on his arm. So, what happens when you take all this pre-existing femininity and give it to a drag queen? First of all, she'll drag it up. She'll make the dress sparklier, the hair bigger, the makeup more, and pad and cinch her body to the gods. And that's only generic drag. More and more queens are pushing the boundary of female-oriented fashion and performance art, and creating what are practically living sculptures out of their bodies. The visual effect is huge. However much a cis-het woman in a gown draws the eye, a drag queen compels it. Then we have the physical effect. Humans are sexually dimorphous, like ducks. Exactly. Men are typically taller, with bigger bodies, broader shoulders, deeper voices. Take that bigger, taller body and drape it in rhinestones, add a 2-foot wig, 6-inch heels, and half of an Ulta Beauty store, and you've got a figure that absolutely transcends our scope of normal bodily proportions as well as physical and visual space. It's the perfect creation for performance. Think about when a drag queen comes on stage for the first time, or rounds the door into the workroom. It's this glorious moment of pow! You never thought a human could look like this. Then we add a few societal elements. Even though they're usually performing to other queer people, drag queens typically take on the expected, or exaggerated, sexuality of cishet women. We as a society are trained from infancy to view everything about the female body as sexual. So when that body is even bigger, more blatantly sexualized, and being performed by someone who doesn't necessarily have a personal history or deeply indoctrinated sense of shame associated with that body, the effect is unstoppable. Also, many drag queens grow up with male privilege. People pay attention when a man walks into a room. They give him more space to sit down. They stop conversations when he starts speaking. That privilege follows men into drag, often to the detriment of kings. Kings, on the other hand, are usually shorter, with higher voices, and don't have the built-in benefit of wigs and heels. Drag kings physically take up less space than drag queens, and masculinity is not performative in the same stage-ready way that femininity is. Being a drag king surrounded by drag queens often means playing this weird double bluff game where you're supposedly in a space that subverts gender, yet you as an individual are actively being constrained by the gender expectations and double standards of people around you. This is a visibility issue, or invisibility issue, that is compounded for trans men in particular. Even though we're in an age of heightened transgender awareness, which is not always a good thing, trans men experience drastically different realities and issues than trans women, which often goes ignored. Trans men in general often go ignored or overlooked. Like, see if you can name the names of 5 famous transgender women. Now what about 5 famous transgender men? What about 10? Do you see what I mean? There's also a deep intersocial dynamic at play when you're working in a scene that is almost exclusively ruled by gay men, with gay men holding all the power, connections, and gigs. My partner noticed that both of us automatically go into girl mode when we're around queens and gay men, where we drop our regular voices and mannerisms and go into these ultra-feminized stylings in order to fit in with and be heard by the people around us, which isn't in itself a bad thing. Like, I get that if you're a gay man, these things can be joyful and expressive. However, as a lesbian, I really enjoy not having to do stuff like that anymore. But as a female, I often don't get paid any attention by gay men unless I'm willing to join in with their idea of what female is. When I was researching for this video, I came across dozens of stories from drag kings all around the world talking about the honestly breathtaking sexism and double standards that they'd experienced in drag from gay men. One king talked about how one time there'd been a funny smell in the dressing room he was in, and all the other queens were joking and accusing him of being the source of it, because he had a vulva, and therefore just emanates stench 24/7. I've personally done competitions where the judges had no problem with queens not padding or wearing breasts, but immediately critiqued me and another king for not packing or binding. Considering that you're surrounded by people who devote so much of their lives to pursuing womanness, the misogyny within the drag community is debilitating. And trust me, I'm very comfortable with misogyny in the workplace. Outside of drag, I'm a fucking mechanic. Before I was a mechanic, I was a cowboy. Neither of these professions are exactly beacons of gender equality. But honestly, I often feel less singled out for my gender in mechanics than I do in drag. But back to queens, and we're nearly done with them, I promise. One of the biggest disservices that queens show to kings is completely failing to acknowledge how much easier it is to transform into a woman than a man. And I don't mean literally, like if drag meant that I had to wear 5 pairs of tights, I don't know if I'd even attempt it. I mean it more in the sense of the Simone de Beauvoir quote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." We have centuries of shit showing you exactly how to become a woman. Cosmetics, fashion, etiquette, everything. But how do you become a man? The implied flip side of that quote is that men do not have to become, they are just born. So what is there to take inspiration from when you're becoming a man for the stage? There are no contouring tutorials, there's like 3 hairstyles total, and the clothing is just whatever. Dressing the female body is a multi-billion-dollar industry. to the point where even just procuring outfits as a queen can be as simple as scrolling through Shein or H&M. And even if you're not looking for regular clothing, there are hundreds of creators and websites out there that sell cabaret and burlesque clothing, rave and festival outfits, even straight up drag queen costumes. All of these options that are ready-made for, literally, performative femininity. If you're looking for inspiration for masculine clothing, however, what have you got? A suit? Basketball shorts? A jockstrap? Remember also that we want stuff that will look good on stage. Bright colours, sparkles, strong silhouettes. Men's clothing doesn't have that in real life, beyond like a sequin tuxedo, and we'll get to those later. Even dance moves are coded pretty femme, especially drag style dancing. There is no blueprint for how to be a king. It's hard enough even finding and meeting other kings to learn from. So, for every king who wants to go beyond the standard like suit and mustache look, he has to invent his own contouring, his own silhouettes, his own entire wardrobe. If a queen starts out at square one when learning how to do her drag, kings don't even start out on the fucking board. At the start of this essay, I said that drag kings and queens are ostensibly incomparable, based on the vastly different ways that they come into drag and what they end up doing with it. Let's break that down. Just as a majority of drag queens are, or start out as, cis gay men, a majority of drag kings are, or start out as, lesbians, or some sort of queer AFAB person. When you're raised female, you are trained to incorporate men into almost every aspect of your life. That ranges from the expectation of marriage and motherhood to learning that some things, like sports and science, are just for boys. Your whole personhood revolves around how men perceive you. When I hit adolescence, I spent years learning how to dress cute, i.e. so that guys would find me attractive, or at least so that I wouldn't get ostracized from my society of other straight girls. As a female, a huge part of realizing that you aren't straight is getting to free yourself of that male-centric worldview of compulsory heterosexuality. I can literally remember one morning when I was about 22 and I'd been out for about a year, and as I was getting dressed, I looked in the mirror and had the automatic thought of, is this cute? Meaning, will guys think this is cute? That morning was the first time that I consciously corrected myself and thought, I don't care if men think this is cute. I'm gonna wear what I want. Clothing and fashion has been important to me since I was a teenager, and this revelation meant that, for pretty much the first time in my life, I could prioritize my own wants and desires when getting dressed. And of course, start dressing for the people I actually wanted attention from. The drag queen origin story of a young gay boy secretly putting on his mother's high heels or makeup is by now so common that RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars, oops, All Winners, literally opened the show with it. There isn't really an equivalent story for most drag kings. As we've discussed, maleness is not so visual, but gender fluidity has always been a part of life for queer women and has historically been just as punishable as femininity is for queer men. Not all drag kings are lesbians, of course, but drag king history is tightly interwoven with lesbian history. Lesbian communities provided much of the foundations for drag king culture. In New York City in the 90s, the first all-king shows started in lesbian bars. As a female, the journey to queerness often runs right alongside the journey to gender variance, to the point that TERFs start panicking about lesbians being turned into trans men. In The Straight Mind, French philosopher and feminist Monique Wittig offers the controversial idea that lesbians aren't women, because to be a woman in society means to orient your life around men. Lesbians refute that just by existing. But that's where the stereotype of the ugly, man-hating lesbian comes from, right? Because the average lesbian doesn't wear tight clothing or makeup, and doesn't care what men think of her. Ergo, in mainstream society, she's ugly and rude. The crucial difference between drag kings and drag queens lies in what it means to inhabit and perform masculinity instead of femininity. Like the quote at the beginning of the video states, femininity is already a devalued form of expression, whereas masculinity is sacred. It forms the bedrock that holds up every other grotesque monument to tyranny in our society, race, capital, empire. We've all seen, both in our personal lives and in the world, what can happen when a man feels devalued or insecure in his masculinity. If you start imitating or pulling apart masculinity in drag, what else are you pulling apart? All these politics are par for the course of king drag. Artist for artist, king drag tends much more political than queen drag, because politics are often much more at the forefront for kings. Body acceptance, trans rights, reproductive rights, or even just giving the middle finger to some good old-fashioned misogyny. Like, there are so many kings who have performances or personas riffing on cis-het male misogyny. And when you've experienced that misogyny yourself, it can be a really empowering thing to take back ownership of. So, when you have AFAB people, especially those who men, gay or straight, don't deem fuckable, up on stage remaking masculinity under their own terms, it presents a much deeper and more potent challenge to everything. And I'll admit, I am not immune to this feeling of being challenged and uncomfortable. A lot of times, nothing makes me cringe more than seeing a baby drag king pull the sexy man face in a selfie or do save a horse, ride a cowboy. But I've seen baby drag queens take bad selfies too and do open stage nights too, and I've never felt the same level of cringe. I think it's partly because seeing masculinity done poorly is nowhere near as uncomfortable as seeing femininity done poorly. And also because I am trained to be far more critical of AFAB people doing anything than I am of AMAB people. So, what's it like to do masculinity for stage? One of the most common criticisms levelled at kings, by queens, is our makeup, or lack thereof. Which A, is wild because there are plenty of queens who are bad at makeup. But B, it erases the many kings who are incredible at makeup. And C, it ignores the reality of making up a male face. Unlike traditional femininity, traditional masculinity does not involve a full face of makeup. Men in real life are ridiculed for wearing even the lightest amount of makeup, whether it's movie stars wearing foundation or musicians wearing black eyeliner. And unless you're a literal Hollywood makeup artist, there isn't even a general knowledge of how to do makeup on men. Every single facet of the cosmetics industry is pointed solely towards women and femininity. There are literally millions of tutorials online for how to create a feminine face. When you're trying to learn king makeup though, what does male contouring look like? What shape should your eyeshadow be? Should you do lipstick? Because there are comparatively so few of us, the only options for kings to try and learn their makeup is to copy one of Landon's Instagram posts or literally invent your whole face by yourself. This makeup criticism also fails to acknowledge the pre-existing relationship that many queer AFAB people have with makeup. For butches and trans men particularly, the line between stage and self can be thin enough that a mask of makeup isn't really part of the act. I don't consider myself particularly butch, as may be obvious, but before I started drag, it was a point of personal pride that I only owned like 5 cosmetic items, and I think one of them was a Burt's Bees chapstick. Now, of course, I have a literal makeup suitcase, but I still don't like wearing makeup outside of drag because I've worked really hard to construct a life where I don't have to. Earlier, we talked a little bit about finding or creating costumes for mass drag. Another common criticism levied at kings is that our outfits are boring, or that all we wear is just suits and street clothes. In part answer to that, I would like to draw your attention to the comparative fashion histories for men and women. Alright, I'm wearing my ambiguously vintage mid-20th century look. I've got the highly angled yassifies, and I'm wearing a black corset, which means I'm now a look queen and you have to listen to my opinions on fashion. So, I'm going to try and be quick about this, even though fashion history is the most interesting topic in the entire world because it's art and culture and politics that everyone participates in every day. Anyway, this video so far has been about drag in the United States and Western Europe mainly, so the fashion history is also going to be about the United States and Western Europe mainly. There is a wonderful Western fashion history blog called Bloschka, which has beautifully illustrated examples of fashion throughout the years. I'm going to use those. And let's dive in. Bloschka's studies start in the 1970s, so we're going to very quickly review the last 40 years. The 2000s and the 90s are defined by fast, casual fashion. Polyester, sportswear, vintage, and millennium-inspired glitz covered, or didn't cover, the supermodel-inspired heroin chic bodies for women. For men, Hip-hop and R&B stars, along with grunge and skater aesthetics, made baggy, loose clothing fashionable. In direct contrast to the women's ultra-tight-fitting, ultra-revealing styles, men's fashion for 2 decades or more follows this like intentionally baggy, often intentionally ill-fitting style, which I maintain ties in with the casual homophobia of that era, when you can call something gay as an insult and like being perceived as gay in any form is the ultimate threat to masculinity. The 80s are remembered for brightness and boldness. Power dressing, padded shoulders, big accessories, neon colours, and this translated into subcultures just as much as it did in the mainstream. Casual sportswear made a huge splash with the workout trend, with stretchy fabrics like lycra, and these trends did overall translate into men's fashion as well, just in more subtle ways. Notably, music groups like Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, and LL Cool J opened up a huge world of possibilities for how men could approach fashion and what they could do with it. But even then, men's fashion is still pretty limited to a top and a bottom. When you compare it to all the different garments, silhouettes, styles available to women's clothing, there just isn't as much to work with for men's fashion. For the 70s with men, we've got admirably tight shirts and trousers, and there's exciting stuff going on with lapel sizes, long hair, flared pants, and good colour palettes. The 70s was honestly pretty great for men's fashion, in my opinion, and a lot of kings do pull from this era because of how iconic it is. But again, we've got pants and shirts. They're just in nicer colours this time. Women's fashion, on the other hand, we've got leftover hippie aesthetic, we've got disco, hot pants, sequins, halter-necks, we've got menswear becoming fashionable for women, trousers are okay to wear outside of the house, we've got punk and Vivienne Westwood. It's fantastic. The 60s is a crucial decade for women's fashion. There's still a lot of the leftover 1950s ladylike stuff going on, but dressing casually starts to be more of a thing. We've got the space age and the youthquake and the hippies. The miniskirt is invented. The mod and hippie movements create a whole new way to do fashion. Buy yourself on the street rather than waiting for designer houses to drop it down to you. Men's fashion is doing okay in the 60s. There's what gets called the Peacock Revolution, which is where men dare to do fun things with their clothes at all, and notable icons include Jimi Hendrix and Mick Jagger. But from the 50s backwards, it starts to get pretty dire for men's fashion. For women in the 50s, we've got the nipped waist and full skirts. Cocktail dresses become a thing, strapless bodices, we've got Balenciaga showing up on a mission to blow everyone's fucking heads off. For men, we've got the suit. And suits are cool. There's so much fascinating history that goes into the detail and tailoring of suits. But James Dean is literally a game changer for wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. That is what revolutionary fashion counts as for men in the 1950s. In the 40s, Bergdorf Goodman comes up with these very cute little silhouettes, top heavy, sleek on the bottom. Christian Dior has the new look, and World War II creates the kind of utility dress, as it gets called. Men's fashion in the 40s is still suits, although it does come with one of history's most interesting and controversial suits, which is the zoot suit or the drape suit. These came out of Harlem and were popular among working class minority men. They were very controversial to white men at the time, who thought that the amount of fabric that was used to create these exaggerated silhouettes was unpatriotic during the war, and people of colour could actually be attacked for wearing them. But the wide silhouettes that these suits created actually stayed extremely popular and kind of shaped the rest of suits for another few decades. In the 30s, thrilling events in men's fashion include undershirt sales declining after Clark Gable says that he doesn't wear one. We are still working solely with suits, although the Great Depression does mean that some things like spats, gloves, canes and waistcoats become less popular. The 30s is a great decade for the flat cap. For women, movie stars create much of the influences for fashion, and new styles of cutting fabric on the bias create these very slinky, kind of figure-hugging little silhouettes. Sharp suits are fashionable, along with mid-cut dresses and the potato sack print. The 20s gives us one of the most recognisable silhouettes in fashion history. This silhouette actually hinged upon simplicity in garment construction, with this cylindrical, boyish figure that became known as the flapper look. For men, we got suits. Notable mention goes to the plus fours, which honestly is one of the only deviations in men's trouser shape of the last 100 years. Alright, speed round. 1910s women were in the tail end of the Edwardian period. The corset starts to fade out and we get cool, weird things like the hobble skirt. For men, still got suits. The three-piece suit, still going strong. The 1900s is peak Edwardian, Art Nouveau, Belle Epoque, with big sleeves, little waist, and the monobosom. For men, still suits. The 1890s is the time for the Gibson girl, the S silhouette, bicycles, House of Worth doing the absolute most, and sleeves getting their 15 minutes of fame. This era is the definition of the word sumptuous, and yes, I am still mad at every person who attended the 2022 Met Gala. Men, suits. 1880s is the bustle era. The bustles are never big enough, the waists are never small enough, and the shoulders are never high enough. The monotony of men's suits in the 1880s is briefly assuaged, for a wild Oscar has appeared. He makes a valiant effort to save us all with his velvet breeches, big floopy ties, and his capes. Unfortunately, it does not catch on, and he is ridiculed at the time, but we love him for it anyway. 1870s is what in America gets thought of as Reconstruction, in Britain it's peak Victorian. Women's clothing gets even more restrictive and more elaborate, and men's clothing does literally the opposite. A journal at the time remarked, "Gentlemen dress as quietly as it is possible to do, and there are no extremes in dress." So, great. 1860s is what we think of in America as the antebellum era, with huge crinoline skirts that could get up to 15 feet in diameter. I personally love the amount of stripes in this era. 1850s and 40s is probably one of my least favourite eras in women's fashion, although it was great if you look good in a middle part. For men, throughout all this, still suits. The first few decades of the 1800s gives us the Regency period, and it is only here that men's fashion starts to look different. This era, featuring the famous dandy Beau Brummel, actually was the initiating period to create what we now think of as the men's suit. Personally, I can't stand women's Regency fashion, but I love men's Regency fashion of this period. We need to do more of it as a collective group of kings. So, we just ran through 200 years, and it is only prior to 1790 that men's fashion starts to look recognisably different than how it is today. Throughout the 18th century, menswear slowly gets more sober as you start to tip into the 19th century, but you take it back to the early 1700s and beyond, and you are off to the races. Western men's fashion is at its all-time peak from 1550 to 1750, and it's all been downhill since then. This is because women's fashion is fashion, because again, a man's worth is not dependent on his appearance. A king in a suit is following exactly the same sartorial concept as a queen in a gown. So why do some queens act like we're lazy or disappointing when we wear one? There aren't websites selling sexy, ready-to-wear clothing for men like there are for cis women and queens. So kings have to invent literally everything about our looks by ourselves. I'm talking silhouettes, concepts, colour schemes, clothing, accessories, shoes, jewellery, hairstyles, everything. These things don't exist for men in the real world. So the fact that there even are kings showing up in anything other than a suit means what? Kings are literally inventing male fashion before our fucking eyes, as if any pageant queen has done anything even remotely original with women's fashion in the last 50 fucking years. I'm sorry. The whole suits and streetwear thing just really gets to me. Because, sure, those sequin tuxedo sets on Amazon are not the cutest things in the world. But what are you supposed to do? A skirt is literally the easiest garment it is possible to make. Have you ever tried making a pair of trousers? Or a blazer? Like, if anyone wants to start making a line of masculine, stage-ready, affordable clothing that isn't suits, and also goes above a size 12, believe me, none of us are stopping you. Okay, and the streetwear thing? I get the critique when it's like literally regular clothes that haven't been bedazzled or anything, although again, queens do not have to deal with this problem in the first place because most women's clothing is designed for visual performance. But we do need to talk about the racialized subtext in criticizing streetwear, because for a lot of people all over the world, especially people of color, refashioning masculinity involves streetwear. It involves baseball caps and sweatpants and sneakers and t-shirts. And if we can get to a point where we're cheering Simone for incorporating black feminine streetwear into her drag, we need to be doing the same fucking thing for kings of colour when they incorporate masculine streetwear into theirs. Jesus Christ. So, that's enough on appearance. Let's focus on the last-ish part of performing, the performing itself. This one, I don't even want to spend time on what other people say about kings. Kings are great fucking performers. I truly think that people who say otherwise are just so used to seal clapping at bodysuited dance queens that any performance without a high kick every 10 seconds doesn't even register. Like I said earlier, most dancing is pretty heavily femme-coded. There are literally hundreds of female superstars that you can look to for inspiration on dancing, walking, poses, hand gestures, everything. But presenting a physical male illusion for the stage is much harder. It's often much more about subtlety and nuance. And obviously there are still male superstars you can look to, Elvis, Michael Jackson, Prince, David Bowie, but a lot of them are so huge and so iconic that you can't copy them too much without looking like an impersonator. So, presenting a male illusion for the stage is difficult. Like so many other things, kings often end up just working out their moves by themselves. I know that in my performances, I've often lumped for a kind of generic femme-ish coded style of dancing rather than explicit male performance because it's just easier. All of that together, however, I'd say a lot of times it's the lack of high kicks and death drops that make kings absolute masters of the art of performance. Because they can't rely on implicit sex appeal, because they can't rely on ready-made dance moves, and often because they are working with smaller bodies and a more constrained performative gender, the camp, the humour, and often the sheer delightful imagination of kings' performances makes them some of the best things you can see on stage. And especially when kings do get their sex appeal down. Jesus. Finally, the running theme of this section has been refuting what people say kings are like, and trying to explain why kings might be the way they are. But the thing is, kings are good, and it's so unfair and frustrating that I have to insist upon that. Sure, you're not gonna like every king that you see, but fuck, you don't like every queen that you see, and you don't dismiss all queens because of that. Part of what makes this video so important and personal to me is knowing how hard kings have to fight for a spot in this industry, and how poorly we are rewarded. It's that old saying of having to work twice as hard to get half as far. And this is all just based on my own experience. Kings who aren't white, who are trans, fat, neurodivergent, disabled, homeless, or for whom English isn't their first language, are facing a whole host of other barriers that's going to stop them from succeeding. But even when you think about how many kings are assigned female at birth, the glass ceiling in drag is Friday and Saturday night shows, which are the shows with the most money. Plenty of show producers and bar owners straight up won't book a king for those nights, if they even book kings at all. In the city I started drag in, a gay mecca of 2.5 million people, there is one king who has standing Friday night bookings. He's also the only regularly booked king in the entire city, despite being part of an entire diverse troupe of drag kings. The troupe's only shows are once a month on Tuesday at a dive bar off the main strip. Other venues kind of really don't care. In my current city, over the past 2 years, I've seen one king have a Saturday night show. And no, not one Saturday night show is run by a king. One king has gotten booked for one Saturday night show one time. So kings have to stick around longer, disprove everyone's expectations, and become phenomenal performers with incredible costumes and concepts before producers even consider putting you in the big money nights. A lot of kings never make it that far. Either they stick to working the nights they're allowed, if they have them, or they drop out of drag. Then it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. New kings have few or no older kings in their local scene to support and guide them, so they can't improve as fast as new queens would. Those new queens get more bookings, by virtue of being queens, which means that they make more money, get more experience, make more connections, they can join families and dynasties, and start climbing the drag ladder faster. Kings, by contrast, don't get those same gigs, so it takes them far longer to get the same experience. They make less money, they often get passed over for connections outright, and they have to struggle for far longer to find their identity, their voice, and their style as a performer. And then you hear show producers, or queens, being like, well, there just aren't any good kings in this city, otherwise I'd book them. It is infuriating. And then, should the stars align and you do get a Friday or Saturday night booking, you have to be like a representative for all kings ever. Like, if you do a number that's a little too out there or your energy doesn't completely blow the roof off, do you think they're going to invite you back next week? No. You were their little experiment, their little DEI booking, and somehow you failed to do it right. So they'll give that spot back to a queen and you can go back to working Tuesday nights where you belong. And getting booked in a show with more than one king, so that you can hang out backstage with someone like you?
Sure, Jan.
Or, what's also happened to me, is I finally get booked for a big night, sometimes after months of trying. I do the show, and then I have queens coming up to me afterwards like, oh my god, you are amazing! I don't know why we haven't booked you before. You're welcome back anytime. Which feels great, of course, but it also makes me want to tear my fucking hair out. Because yeah, why didn't you book me before, huh? Like, okay, story time. A few months ago, I got booked for a show at the big gay bar in my city. I'm doing my number, it's high energy, I've got reveal, I'm dancing, I'm working my way around the bar, and there's this big group of like a dozen gay men hanging out at the bar. And I give them a second, see if they're interested, and they all ignore me. So I'm like, fine, and I keep going. Because not everyone's there for the drag show, Some people just want to drink. So I finish my number, and this queen comes up after me. She looks gorgeous. She's got this huge sparkly dress on, and her number is like this pop-y ballad. And all she's doing is just walking around the room. No dancing, nothing. But she gets to this group of gay men, and all of a sudden they are shoving money into her hands. Cheering, screaming, cannot get enough. And then afterwards, when we're dragging backstage, this queen is thumbing through her money, and she's like, damn, I got a whole bunch of 20s tonight. And this queen next to her is like, yeah, that crowd was handing out 10s and 20s like candy. And I look through my money, and it's just ones. And sure, I get it. I was a fairly new performer on the scene. These queens have been around longer than I have, people know them more, blah blah blah. I've also heard other people telling stories like this, and there's always this smug voice in the back of my head going like, well, your number sounds great when you tell it, but maybe it just wasn't that good of a performance. Drag needs that star power, that je ne sais quoi. Maybe you just didn't have it. And yeah, I know all that. And I know that effort is never quantifiable. Everyone puts in effort, I know. But I also know that I am a good performer. End of. And I know that I do look good. And so when you're performing to the exact same crowd as these queens who are sometimes making hundreds of dollars more than you are, and part of your income, literally being able to buy groceries, relies on what you make at these shows, and you do put in so much effort, it feels shit. It feels really shit. Sometimes it makes you not want to do it anymore. And this happens all the time, and not just to me. I watch people, gay men especially, literally turn away in their seats or pick up their phone when a king comes on stage. And not just kings, trans performers, people of colour, disabled performers, people who often need the money the most are the ones who get dismissed off the bat. And that money instead goes to another sparkly queen in a blonde wig. So, what am I asking for? Change? Sure, I guess. I want people to realise who kings are and what we do. I want people to understand the prejudices and bigotry that exists in the LGBTQ community, a community that's supposed to be about loving and liberating people for who they are. I want kings to get booked more, to get more money and more followers on social media. I want us to get the opportunities and recognition that we deserve. And I do want kings on RuPaul's Drag Race, problematic though the show is. A lot of this responsibility for change comes down to show producers and venue owners, audiences, and other queens. It's slowly getting more shameful for producers to have a cast of only white queens on their flyers, although it straight up should not be happening at all. But it's pretty simple. You have to be booking kings in your shows. If there aren't that many kings in your area, book the same kings over and over again. Bring them in from out of town. They're probably not spoiled for choice. Because if you give space to kings and gender non-conforming performers on your stage, it will literally inspire more kings to come up in your area. But people have to know that option is even open for them. RuPaul, for fuck's sake, book some fucking kings. I know you'll have to do like a whole branding overhaul, but you make like 100k an episode. I'm sure you can make it happen somehow. I don't believe there's any benefit to a separate but equal show concept, which some people argue for. Drag Race has the big bucks. Let us have the big bucks. To get the ball rolling, may I suggest channeling some creativity, opulence, charm, and kindness? Audiences. I think there can be this expectation, especially, and I'm sorry to keep harping on about this, but especially for cis gay men, that when you go to a drag show, you're getting Laganja Estranja lookalikes whirling and twirling and flip-flopping around in the sexiest outfits imaginable, and that's what drag is. Stop that. If you want a circus act, go to Cirque du Soleil. Not only is it putting wildly unrealistic expectations on drag performers across the board to do extraordinarily difficult things that can take years of training, but it means that you are selling yourself short on what drag is, what your queer community is, and what queer drag art can be. This is not universal, of course. I have performed for so many audiences who are an absolute delight, who wanted to see kings, who wanted to see the art, and who really created a genuine sense of community, solidarity, and happiness. I want more audiences to come into drag shows the way you come into an art gallery. You're there to see what artists have created and celebrate them for it, while also having a really good time and getting drunk. You don't have to like all the art, but you're not there to make personal demands of the artist and their work. Other queens. I mean, I'm not here to tell you what to do with your art, but don't you ever want to just push it a little more. I actually interviewed queens while writing this video, and I asked them how drag had impacted their view of gender. A lot of queens said that drag had helped them realize that gender is a construct, and it's all about messing around and having fun. So, why do so many of y'all mess around and have fun and end up doing the exact same thing? If you're aware that gender's a construct, why does your drag consistently fall back on that construct? What about the silicone boobs and sexy dress is so fascinating to you, week after week? Doesn't femininity, in all of its glorious and complex forms, have any more interest to you than that? Doesn't gender? What about your own gender? Aren't there pathways you haven't travelled down, corners you haven't explored yet? Drag can do that for you. Let it. Or don't, you know. But do. Also, if you are a show producer or a bar owner, it is imperative that you are booking kings. To not do so at this point is active misogyny, just as having an all-white cast or all-white producers is active racism. And I mean, y'all are feminists, right? You believe that AFAB people are just as talented and capable as AMAB people, right? I mean, it would be insane to make money off of impersonating women and femininity and not be an active supporter of the political movement that, at the very least, centers around women and AFAB people, right? Kings. When I started this essay, I kept having moments when I wanted to, rag us a bit. Do some light teasing. Like, come on guys, why do so many of our forehead contours look like a half-built suspension bridge? But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, there's no point. There's not enough of us to make that shit worthwhile, and a lot of us are out here doing the best that we fucking can in limited circumstances. It's our art form, and we know what we're doing and what speaks to us. Would I like to see more kings getting to push the boundaries of makeup, fashion, art, performance? Absolutely. But a reciprocally inspirational community like that requires activity and visibility so that we can see what each other is doing and be informed and inspired by each other. There are forces far greater than us actively invested in preventing that from happening. And we as a group have been extremely polite about how shitty all of this is for an extremely long time. I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting very tired of tiptoeing around these issues and of having to beg and fight for any space of our own, and of acting grateful for the scraps that get thrown to us from the rest of the drag community. Kings as a collective and as individuals have been doing amazing stuff for such a long time, and there's more amazing stuff happening right now. This is an awesome time to be a king. So, we will keep pushing our art, my dear kings, and we will not let ourselves get dispirited by ignorance from people who don't even try to understand our work in the first place. We will keep supporting each other, inspiring each other, booking each other, and showing up for each other, as we always fucking have done, and we always fucking will. And this truly applies to all drag performers. I want us to succeed, I want our community to thrive, and I want queer people with money and time to rest and create their art. I'm an artist, yes, but most of all I'm a hedonist. I live for pleasure in all its forms, but especially the visual. I want to see the gorgeous amalgamations of life and culture and art that drag allows. I want to see our creativity, our daring, our sheer joy in the face of a heartless, collapsing world. Take these gender ideologies that constrict all of us and toss them up into whatever notion takes your fancy. Let drag do what it does best, taking all the love and crafts of the world and channeling them down into 4 minutes of delight on some dingy stage in a backstreet bar. I don't want to see gender as I already know it, as I've already escaped from it. I want to look at a drag stage and see what a better world looks like, a world overflowing in art and freedom and abundance. And lots of drag kings. The thing is, kings are good. Bud. Ergo, in mainstream society, Sue's ugly anyway. Sue, I cannot believe you ruined that fucking Sue! Fuck off! Bud. Hey! Sir, get the fuck out. Hey, don't bite me! You cunt. Get out of there. Go on. You're going in isolation. I told you. Unironically, I think that drag queens in like full drag, like heavy makeup and everything, but with no wig or just a wig cap on is like one of the hottest, most gender things that you can do. And y'all should do more of that as your actual look. I think it's very cool. Look like I'm gonna go on RuPaul's Drag Race UK, finish 7th, and get booked at Ford Models by the end of the year. Also, like, me getting into queen drag for this bit, like, I get it. Like, it's really fun, you're really sparkly, you have great hair, blah blah blah, like, I get it. But my points still stand, okay?